Hello and welcome to Findlay Designs. Today's video is on how I created this galaxy piece. Now it started out that I painted the background on, well, I painted it black and then painted the stars and everything in, and it was going quite well. I then blundered and put too much glitter in the resin and then had to scrape that off. That particular day was not a good day. Things seemed to go from bad to worse, and I tried to fix it and I ended up making a right mess of it. So I then had to rethink things and then fix it. So you can see in the video how I then fixed it and then had to give it another flood coat of resin. So this video is a number of different elements to it. So how I started, how I blundered, and then how I fixed it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. So without further ado, let's get into how I created this planet piece. So for this project I'm using a 90 by 50 centimeter MDF board. It's 12mm thick, and I'm using regular black acrylic paint to paint in the background. Now you can either use acrylic paint to seal your board, or primer, or PVA glue mixed with a bit of acrylic paint. There's a number of different ways that you can seal your board. This one I'm just using the black paint because obviously the background is going to be black, so all I'm just using here, as you can see, is a roller just to coat the whole board, and I also coat the sides. Now this is a very good black paint. It doesn't need 2 coats, but quite often if I'm doing white, I'll often do at least 2 coats just to make sure that you can't see the board peeping through the colour. So all I'm doing here is I'm just adding a little bit of extra paint to the edge just to make it easier for me to add the colour to the sides. So once that's all nicely coated, I'll then leave that to dry for a few hours before moving on to the next step. So now I'm taking some white acrylic paint and I've watered it down with a touch of water, and I'm using an old brush to flick white paint onto the board to give it a starry night. Now I'll go over in certain areas to make sure that the white is more dense in some areas and not so much in others, because I want to give it that impression that it's a galaxy. So a galaxy will have areas where you've got more dense stars than others. So that this is what I'm doing here, is I'm just looking and seeing where it needs extra paint splatters. As you can see, I'm just using my fingers to flick the paint. Another good method for this is using an old toothbrush, because the bristles are quite stiff. You get good flicks from that. I couldn't find my old toothbrush, so I reverted to using a regular paintbrush for this method. And once again, once you're happy with the layout, you then just leave it to dry overnight. So while that's left drying, I'm now going to create the shapes for the planets. Now I'm using a plastic sheet, which I'm using various items to create the circle. Now for the big planet, I don't need it to be a full circle because it's going to be coming off the corner, so I'm just using the corner of a sheet of plastic and then going to trim that down with scissors. And I do the same with the other 2 planets. So I use an upside down bowl, and I use a plastic measuring cup for the other 2 sizes of planets. Now the idea is to pour the resin onto the plastic and then place that on top, so that we've then got 2 separate layers, so one for the planets and one for the galaxy. So I wanted to give like a 3D impression.
However, as I blundered and I ended up using more resin than anticipated, the planets do get lost slightly and they become one level. But in the future, when I come to do future galaxies and space resin artworks, I will use this method and the planets will actually stand out a little bit more proud from the rest of the background, so it'll give it that 3D element. So once we have our shapes, it's now time to pour the resin. So for the two smaller planets, I'm actually going with two dark colours. Now I've mixed a touch of magenta, sapphire blue and black in with this, and although you can't really see it that well in the picture here, it does have subtle tones, and I poured the colours all into one cup so that when they mix they would have like that mottled effect. Again, sorry, you can't really see in this video the pattern that's creating. So I'm just using the stick to just pull the resin out to the edges of the plastic. Now the idea was to create a doming effect with the resin on top of the plastic. Now the resin will run off the plastic, but don't worry about that because we're actually going to come back in an hour or so and lift that off and separate it from the background, from the runoff I should say, so that we got an easier area to trim. So for this planet, it's actually I've added more pink and I've added some white to this because there's going to be areas where it's lighter, particularly on the outer curve. It's going to be a bit whiter there. So again, I poured it all into the one cup and just allowing that to do its thing because I didn't want it to be too regimented in me doing the pour. I'm allowing the resin to do its thing. So again, I'm just going to move that out to the edge, apply a bit of heat to pop the bubbles and let it level by itself. And to help break the colours up a little bit, I'm applying a little bit of mineral turpentine. Now I get asked quite a lot, is mineral turpentine the same as white spirits? Is it the same as mineral spirits? So I did a little bit of research, and mineral turpentine in Australia is the same as white spirits in the UK and mineral spirits in the US, I think off the top of my head. So they're pretty much all the same. So anything that you would use to clean your paintbrushes after doing some house painting or whatever, or you do oil paints or anything like that. So what you would regularly clean your brushes is what you would use to create this effect. Now the reason why I use this is pure and simply because once it's done its thing, it evaporates and it doesn't leave any divots in your resin. Now for the planets, you could actually use some oil in here because you would actually welcome some divots. So I think next time I try this, I might try some oil in there because to get some craters in the planets, because I think that would make a nice addition to the piece. So this has been curing for about an hour now, and so what I'm going to do now is attempt to separate the plastic from the runoff. So it's not that easy to lift off, but the idea is to move that away. So it doesn't matter then if you've got untidy edges on your plastic, because it's going to just be a little bit easier to trim off than having a full thick piece of resin on the edge of your plastic. So I'm just using a spatula to lift that off. And I'm trying my best not to touch the resin, but it turned out quite well. This one was a little bit more tricky because it's bigger, so I just tried to get my fingers underneath without touching it too much. So what I did in the end was the areas that I know I was going to be trimming off the excess, I used my fingers to pick it up and then move it out of the way. And then that was left to cure overnight once again. So now it was time to remove the plastic from the back. Now where some of the resin had run underneath the back, it was proven to be a little bit difficult to get that plastic off. So I just trimmed some of this excess off just so that I can get to that plastic to take that plastic off. So on this I was finding it difficult to get the plastic off the back of the smaller pieces, so I decided to just apply some sellotape to the back of the plastic, so that would create a little lip that then allowed me to lift it off. So that just makes things a little bit easier. So if you're having trouble to get your plastic off, just do the same thing. Just add a little bit of sellotape to the back and then apply some pressure, and then you can then get that plastic off. As you can see, this smaller one was quite difficult, and it did eventually come away. So what I'm doing now is I'm positioning where the planet's going to go, and I'm going to trim off the excess from that corner piece. So if I just position them roughly where I want those to go, so I know when I come to place the resin, I can see where the galaxy needs to be. And then I'm just going to outline the planets, just so that when I come to pour the resin, I've got an idea on where those planets are going to sit. And I'm just marking off the areas that I'm going to trim off. So the same goes with the smaller pieces. I'm just marking where they're going to be positioned on the board. It's just going to make life a little bit easier down the track. So once we're happy with the position, it's now time to trim off the excess. So I'm lining this up on my cutting mat to make sure that I get a nice square corner when trimming. And I'm just using a sharp knife and obviously a metal ruler to score the resin. Now, I didn't warm the resin up initially when doing this, and it was proving to be quite hard to cut, so I was able to score it, and then later on I go back, because what I'd done was when I tried to snap the resin off, I actually snapped a little bit extra off, so I went back and I heated the resin and then cut it, and I should have done that initially. So, you know, take that lesson from me, that if you warm your resin first, it makes it much easier to cut. Now, because I had to cut a little bit extra off because I just snapped a little bit off the edge, I'm going to have to now adjust the line, the marking of where the planet's going to go. So as you can see, I took a little smidgen off the edge there, so I'm just going to remark that so that I know where that's going to go. So what I'm doing here is I've actually turned this over so that I can start painting the glow from the planet on the background. So I'm using the planet as a template, or a stencil if you like, so that I don't do the paint across the back. I mean, it wouldn't have really mattered anyway if I'd done that, but I was just trying to make sure that I had that working quite well. Now I'm using a makeup sponge to apply this acrylic paint, so I'm just dabbing that on and going around the planet. Now I go to a lot of trouble to do this, but then you'll see in a moment when I come to add the resin that this was an absolute and utter waste of time, because I literally was starting again. Same goes for the stars. I ended up, because of the mistake that I make next, that galaxy that I went to a lot of trouble to do ended up being a waste of time. But if you learn from my mistakes, then you can, you can do this step for your own galaxy. So once you've done that, it's now time to turn over your planet, and now we're going to just paint some of the white acrylic paint on the edge of the acrylic, so that we've got that highlight creeping over the edge. Now this is to try and give it a more 3D effect, so we're just going to add a little bit of the white just to the upper edge and just bring that in a little bit, but just dabbing all the time because you don't want it to be a hard edge. So using the sponge, this helps to create a stippled effect on the edge of the planet. Now the resin on these two discs was actually quite transparent, so what I'm going to do here is I'm turning them over and making sure that the proper face, it's face down. So now I'm just going to do the same thing that I did with the other planet, and I'm going to give it an outer glow. Now I'm actually going to paint the whole of the back of the resin discs, just so that the colour stands out proud. Otherwise it could get lost with the background because with it being transparent. So it just makes that, just lifts that colour slightly on the front. So again, using the sponge, I'm just going to dab this. Again, this ended up being, you know, a task that I didn't need to do with hindsight, but it'd definitely be something you could do in the future, if you were just going to put clear resin on the top. Now, after I painted the white on the back, I realised that I could have just left that as it was and just painted the white on the board itself. So you can do it either way. I ended up adding white to the board anyway of where those circles are going to go. And what I'm doing here is I'm using the sponge again to create that smoky galaxy effect across the background also. And as you can see, I ended up painting those areas anyway, and I've just added a little bit of white to the edge of the discs as well. So here now I'm creating the shadows on the main planet. So using some black acrylic paint, again using the sponge, I'm now just dabbing the paint on there to just give that, again, that 3D effect. So this bit is more in shadow, so I'm just going to go over that and just create that shadow, being mindful of trying to keep some of those highlights there, so to show the craters in the planet, if you like. Now at this stage I was really pleased with how this was looking, and then this is when things went pear-shaped. I mixed some silver glitter in with the resin and then instantly saw that there was way too much glitter in the resin. So I thought, well, I'll spread it about and see how it looks. But it was just hiding the stars that I'd painted before, and it was just not working at all. So I continued to push it round and decided that this isn't working. I need to take this back off again as best I could. So I went and found a dish, a flattish dish that I could scrape this resin onto to try and remove as much as possible. So it was this point when I was thinking, do I abandon this? What do I do with it? But I decided I would try and fix it. Not sure whether I should have just left it where it was and then just came back another day. But with hindsight, I thought, oh yeah, I'll see if I can get this off. This scraper wasn't working very well, so I found that using my hand was the best method of getting this off. So next I decided to just pour some clear resin on the top, because I thought, well, what I could do is I could try and hide some of that glitter by pouring some more colours on the top. But I was also mindful of the fact that if I start doing that, I'm going to start losing the stars that I'd painted earlier. But I needed some resin on there for the other colours to help flow. So this is what I'm doing here, is I'm just giving this a coating of clear before then adding the next colours on top. So using the same colours that I used for the planet, it's a fuchsia pink and a sapphire blue and some white. I'm now drizzling some of the resin on top using a spoon. I'm using a spoon because it's a little bit easier to control than pouring, so you can get it in areas without it being too thick on there, because we're going to blow this with the heat gun and we don't want it to be too thick, because we want it to have that sort of wispy, cloudy sort of effect happening. So using the heat gun on a high setting, I'm now blowing this round. Now here's where my next mistake was. I didn't put enough clear down. I only put a very, very thin layer, so the resin wasn't moving very easily. So I was having to use quite a lot of pressure, a lot of time moving that, which was causing the resin to smoke a little bit. So I was obviously burning the resin a little bit, but I was trying to get it to move. I mean, I decided that I was obviously going to be sticking another layer of resin on top of this anyway. So the fact that I was getting like little ripples and undulations in the resin, I wasn't going to worry too much about it, because I was hell bent on trying to fix it. And again, now because I had put some of the pink and the blue down, the white did move a little bit easier. Plus the resin was already quite warm because I was burning it before, so the white did move a little bit easier. And I wasn't really sure whether this was going to work or not, so it was just a bit of trial and error, to be honest with you. So what I do is I just continue pouring the resin where I want the galaxy and Milky Way effect to appear. Now it was dumbing down the glitter a little bit, so I was quite pleased that I was starting to lose some of that glitter in the background, but obviously I was losing the stars as well. But at this stage I was just trying to salvage something out of it, and it wasn't quite looking how I intended, but I persevered anyway. So now I felt that this was a bit too bright, so I started adding some black to the coloured pigment that I'd already, coloured resin that I'd already mixed. So I was just adding, so I added a touch of black to the dark blue, to the blue, and it gave me a dark blue, and then done the same with magenta, which gave me like a dark purple, and I just put that over the top because I wanted to dumb down the colours a little bit because they were just looking a little bit too bright. Now this was my next mistake. I just wanted to improve the colour of the white on the planets, so I decided I was going to pour a little bit of white and blow them out, and yeah, it just wasn't working at all. So next time I won't do this one, this stage. And don't get me wrong, it does produce nice effects, but it was not the effect that I was after. So yeah, it looked like the planets had dropped in the ocean rather than was sitting in the night sky. And then, for reasons best known to myself, I decided to use a stick to pull it out to try and give it another look. That didn't work either. So I'm now sprinkling some of the black pigment to try and tone that white down. Again, I needn't have bothered doing that, and it does, but don't get me wrong, it does produce nice results, but it just wasn't the result that I was looking for. So with hindsight, I should have left well alone some time ago. I should have given up on today and come back another day, but I carried on for reasons best known to myself to try and salvage something out of this piece. So after doing this, I decided to call it a day and come back to it the next day. So I let that resin cure, and so the next day I come back with the plan to fix the areas that I was not happy with. So what I'm doing initially here is I'm sanding the whole piece because I want to make sure that the flood coat of resin that I stick on here doesn't end up with any divots, or it doesn't repel in places, because I've added because I've been messing around with it so much, I was worried that some of the resin wouldn't stick in areas. So I'm just using a sanding block, and I'm just giving this piece a bit of tooth for the resin to adhere to, because I've tried pouring resin straight on top of cured pieces before, and I have had areas where it's repelled, especially at the edges. So just taking this time to sand this back just means that I've got a good base to begin with, because I didn't want it to, you know, I'm still obviously trying to fix the piece, so I didn't want it to be an absolute utter disaster. So by taking the time to do this, I'm hoping that this is going to help me today. And once I've finished sanding it, I'm just going to use a baby wipe to take the excess sand and dust off the piece. So just going to give that a good wipe down, and then I'll dry it off with a tea towel and come back when it's dry to then work on the next plan of action. So my first task is to fix the white around the planets, and how I'm going to do that is by using some acrylic paint to cover the white and basically start again with those edges. Now I don't want to cover the whole thing with paint because I do like the background colour of the galaxy, so I'm just going to work on the areas that needs fixing. So again, using black acrylic paint and a cosmetic sponge, I'm now colouring in and covering the white area, and I'll go around the planets and just fix those areas. Now by using a sponge you don't get any hard edges, so you can move out and fade that from the edge, so you use more intense colour near the edge of the planet and then work your way out. So for me that's already a huge improvement on what I had before. So now I'm going to do the same with the other two planets, and I'm just going to use the black acrylic paint to get rid of that white, and then we'll come back in and fix those areas. Now I'm also going way past the white and just darkening areas that I feel need darkening up a little bit. So I'm moving out to, because as the planets are a little bit further away from the light source, I'm just making that area a little bit darker. And I'm also shading in the bottom half of the darker planets so that that's more in shadow away from the light source. So I'm going to do that for both planets, and then I'm just going to continue the black outwards just to give a more dense colour in the background, so just help those planets stand out a little bit more. Next it's on to adding some white highlights again, so just give the planets a bit of a glow, and by using the sponge I've got more control over how much of that glow we're going to be getting from the planets. Now I could have actually left that planet without the glow, but I decided it just needed that little bit extra to just help it blend in a little bit with the painting and not look like it's just been plonked on the top. And then just using the edge of the sponge, I'm now adding highlights to the top edge of the two planets, just so that they stand out a little bit more and give a little bit more interest to those planets. Now I find the cosmetic sponges work well for this because they're wedge shaped. I can use different edges for different areas. Now I was trying to do like a sun glow off this. Now I actually end up painting that back in and then using a paintbrush to get nice clean lines instead. So I just do the same thing for the other planet. I just give the planet a nice glow off the top and just add a little bit of white highlights to the top just to give that more 3D look, and I'm also adding a little bit of a metallic turquoise to the bottom, just to give that a bit of a glow at the bottom also, and just dabbing some black over the top to tone that down so it's not too in your face, because that's what I think was wrong with the first lot I'd done. There was just way too much white and it just wasn't really working for me at all. So now using the paintbrush, I'm now going back and redoing the streams of light from the sun. And with using a paintbrush, I've obviously got a lot more control over that, whereas it was just not working before. Again, one of my many mistakes with this piece. So now that I'm happy with this, it's now time to prepare the board for the splatters of paint to then make the stars. So using just some items to just cover the planets up, because I don't want the stars to be in front of the planets, because then it wouldn't look right. So I'm using similar items that I used to create the shapes in the first place. So I'm just making sure that those are covered before doing the stars. So using some white acrylic paint, and again using the paintbrush method that we used at the very beginning, it's now time to flick the paint on top to put the stars back in. So for this I added a touch more water to the paint, because I wanted some bigger blobs, splatters, whatever you want to call it, onto the piece, so they just stood out a little bit more, because the other ones were quite fine and you couldn't really see them. So I've added more water to the white acrylic paint so we get larger splashes happening. So I'm using a combination of tapping the brush on my hand to get the water and paint to come off, and using my fingers to help flick the paint onto the board. So now I'm feeling it's actually starting to take shape, and it's starting to look more like I planned in my head. So what I'm doing as well is any big blobs that were a little bit too much, I'm using a baby wipe to just dab the larger paint spots to tone them back a little bit, and it just so that they're not too in your face, so that it looks a little bit more realistic. Now note, I'm dabbing, not dragging the baby wipe across. I'm just literally just toning down the white a little bit so it's a little bit more subtle, and as you can see, that's actually looking a lot better already. And so now I'm just going to add some little shooting stars here and there, just to give a little bit of added interest to the piece. So now I'm happy with that. It's now time to add that final flood coat of resin, and I'm really pleased with how this turned out. So what started out with what I thought was going to be an absolute disaster actually turned out quite well, and I'm really pleased. I probably could have done the planets a little bit better, but for my my second attempt at a galaxy, I'm actually really pleased with how this turned out, and I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and I'm hoping that by watching this video you can see the mistakes I made, so that you don't make the same mistakes and you get better results first time round. Now I know this was a lot longer than my usual videos. That was because there were so many different components going on, but I hope that you were able to learn from my mistakes for your own galaxy resin artwork. If you haven't done so already, then please subscribe to my channel. You'll find a list of the products used in the description below. You'll also find many other videos in my channel, so please go and have a little look through those. So until the next video, bye for now.